We're living in the modern age, and when we want to plant churches, we use the Bible as our primary basis of understanding. But we have to realize, too, from other disciplines and other areas of success in our modern-day society. And so what I want to do now is I want us to look at another example that may be of interest to us, and it's what I call the macdonalds theory of church planting. Now, most of you are aware of the fact that all around the world today there are McDonald's restaurants. Many people consider these to be American, and I think they really are. I've had a lot of experiences with McDonald's, and I know a lot of their theory, and I know a lot of what they do. And I just want to share a few of these things with you. I did have one example one time when I was in Austria. The son of the pastor of the Baptist church in Vienna was going to go to the university. And it was, back in about the 1970s, early 1970s, and McDonald's had just come into Europe. And so I was talking to him, and I was working with him, and as he was a young man in the church. And he said to me, I'm going to the university, and I need to get a job so I can go to school and work at the same time. And I said, why don't you go to McDonald's? Because you can get a job and work. And he said, oh, no, that's an American restaurant, and everybody else will laugh at me because they don't want anything to do with this American restaurant. And so I talked him into going with McDonald's, and finally he said, okay. And so he went and started working at McDonald's all during the time that he was in the university. I remember going back to Austria, and I was wondering what had happened to Hannes. And I went back, maybe about 15 years ago, and I asked what happened to him. And they said, don't you know? Well, I said, no. They said, he has been considered one of the most successful businessmen in Austria. And he was even written up one year as the most successful businessman in Austria for that year. Oh, what's he doing? Oh, well, he is the head of the international department for McDonald's and goes all around the world with McDonald's. So I thought like I had a little bit to say about McDonald's at that point. But it was very interesting to me how they got started and a little bit of what they did and the philosophy that they did that I think can be translated also into church plants. What had happened back in the 1960s, the latter part of the 1960s, there were many of these fast food chains in America that looked over towards Europe and said, we need to enter into the European scene. One of them was Kentucky Colonel Fried Chicken. Another one was one called Big Boy. And there were about 3 or 4 of them. And so they all said they had a philosophy, and their philosophy was this. We will go into Europe, and we will define the largest cities in the area, and then we will build one of our stores in that particular place. I'm thinking primarily of Kentucky Colonel Fried Chicken. They went and they started one in Innsbruck, Austria, and they started one in Brussels, Belgium, and they started one in Frankfurt, and they started one in Hamburg. And they took these larger cities and they started these fast food restaurants. Well, the problem was fast food restaurants were foreign to the European scene, and they did not go very well. In fact, I remember the one in Innsbruck, it went out of business, and I talked to the man that started it and says, why did it go out of business? He said, well, what it was the Europeans, if they go out to eat, they go out to eat, and it's a big event. Whereas what the fast food restaurants are saying is you take the food and you go home. And so what was happening, where they were having these Kentucky Colonel Fried Chicken places, and these men would come and get the food to take home, and all the prostitutes found out that all these men were coming in, and they thought this is a good place to be, so they would go and sit there and try and display their wares there at the Kentucky Colonel Fried Chicken. They went out of business. They couldn't do it. They were spread out too much, and they just simply went out of business, and Kentucky Colonel Fried Chicken failed to enter into Europe, as did all these other fast food places. So McDonald's came along, and the McDonald's was well known in America. Now, we have a large number of American military living in Europe, and many of them in Germany. And so McDonald's said, where are we going to start our first one? We're going to start one in Germany. Where? Close to an American military base, but not on the military base, because we don't want it to be an American restaurant. So they went halfway between the American military base and the downtown part of Munich, Germany. And they built a McDonald's restaurant. Now, they had a lot of the military people come, and they were there, and then they began to have the German people come. And the thing was somewhat of a success. It really was. It took them a while to be able to get people to come, and they had to kick out some of the gamblers, which were the kind of the hippie types that wanted to just come there and spend all their time. They had to have certain rules, but the thing went pretty successful. Then they decided to start a second one in Europe. And where did they go with the second one? They went to downtown Munich. And they already had the one halfway to downtown, so they went next to the train station, and they started the second one in downtown Munich. And it began to be fairly successful. Then they decided to start a third one in Europe. Where was it? It was in Munich, Germany, in a area a little bit outside of the downtown. Then they decided to start a fourth one in Germany, and where did they start it? In Munich, Germany. But no, that's wrong. Why would you start them all in Munich? Why not spread them out? Because they wanted to say, we want to become known as a German restaurant in a German city and have more of these places. Then they decided to start another one, and they went where? To Augsburg, Germany, the next city over. And they repeated that in Augsburg, Germany. Then they wanted to start another one. Where'd they go? To Nuremberg, Germany, and they repeated it. They now have 27,000 McDonald's around the world, and most of these were started in this way. Now, it's very interesting to me that many times what we do is we start a church in a major city, and it's totally isolated from everybody else. And when that church is isolated, we expect them to live and to exist and to be successful, but they're alone, and the people don't know anything about who they are, and it just simply does not go very well. Now, another thing that McDonald's has always done is they have always chosen the very best location. They spend a lot of time on the location. If you go to a town called Cologne, Germany, which is one of the major cities in Germany, you will go right next to the big cathedral, the largest, the tallest cathedral in Christianity, and right at the base of this cathedral there's a McDonald's restaurant. And I remember going to to the leader of that one time, and I said, why in the world did you rent this place for your McDonald's restaurant? You could have gone 2 blocks down the street, and you could have gotten that place for half the price. He says, yes, we're aware of that, but we wanted it to be in the very best place. And they have taken the best places, and they have been successful. Now, one thing about the Olivet movement is I think we've been pretty successful in that area too. We've gotten best places, good places for us to meet. And I think we need to do the same thing with our churches. We need to be very careful where we place our churches, but to place them in a place that is very successful. Now, another thing about McDonald's that I thought was interesting, one of the young men that I used to work with in Salzburg, Austria, also took on one of the franchises, and he worked through my friend that became the head of McDonald's International, but he took over a franchise, and he told me what he had to do. I said, now, was it easy to get a franchise? He says, no, it was very difficult to get a franchise. He said, this is what I had to do to get a franchise for McDonald's. He said, first of all, I had to go and present to them I think it was $80,000. I had to have $80,000 up front to say, I'm going to invest this in the restaurant. That's good. That's not a lot of money if you're going to go into a new business, but it was quite a bit of money. And then he had to appear before 12 people. And I asked him, would this 12 people have anything to do with the 12 disciples? He says, I don't know, but he said there was a committee of 12 people. And he had to go and appear before this committee of 12 people and present his case and tell them why he wanted to have a franchise and tell them that he had the money, and they looked into his background to find out what type of a person he was. And then they approved him and said, okay, we will approve you to become a franchisee owner of a McDonald's. But he still had to do one other thing. He had to give 6 months of his time for free to McDonald's, to work in McDonald's for 6 months for free. And then what he had to do, in this 6 months, he had to start out at the very lowest position, cleaning the bathrooms, cleaning the floors, mopping the floors. And then after about a month, he would go out in the front and he would take orders. And then he would go and he would start cooking hamburgers after that. And then he would be an associate director. He had to go through every single one of the positions that they have in a McDonald's restaurant. And he had to work for about a month for free in that position so as to know exactly what they needed to do. And then after he had done all of that, had given the money, they allowed him to open his own McDonald's, and he was very successful with it. I think that maybe we lose a little bit by not allowing our people to have the experience in the church. And so I think that in the indigenous model, what we need to do is we need to help them to do the various jobs in the church. And then as they do these jobs, and also give them the right even to preach as often as possible, so that they eventually can take over the leadership in the church.